All right, everybody. We're going to have Daniel Swamy in here. Daniel Swamy has many years of experience in the industry as a lab owner with material science. He currently works in research. Works currently in research and development of materials like zirconia and nanoceramics. As an educator, he worked in the leading prosthodontist technicians and clinical around the world. You're welcome. Thanks, welcome.
There you go. Turn my microphone on.
You need to stay or just come back with it?
Yeah. Hello, is that working? Yeah.
No,
Great. Excellent. Thank you, Kate, for having me here. Appreciate it. So I represent, my name is Daniel Swamy. I represent ADITE. And on behalf of ADITE, I just want to welcome you. I know that there are very few people here, but I think we are streaming live. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate you being here. So just as an introduction to ADITE, this is my third company that I've worked at. My background is material science from the University of Washington. And I've had a lab for, many years, maybe 28 years or so. And I also had a dentures practice. So that sort of allowed me to do more research about materials, especially in the field of zirconia, and then also with hybrid materials like ultra, nanoceramics, and as well as feldspathic ceramics. So I learned very quickly as I was, by the way, I worked for SageMax and I developed all their line of zirconia. And then I went on to Haney, and this is my third company right now. And also with a company called Digital Dental in Scottsdale, Arizona. So as I was sort of transitioning from the lab business onto the material science business, it was because of my health issues. So I decided that this was something that I really liked because I had studied it at college. And I found that zirconia was a very interesting material. So at the inception, when Vita was coming out with it and 3M was also coming out with it, I had a good friend at SageMax, Larry Dang, his name was, a brilliant man, and he brought me some white powders, and he said, I know we can do something with this in the dental industry. So we began to do some research, and at that time there were some patent issues, so you could sell a small block and then some glue and a mandrel. And that's how we got started. Later on, he decided to actually start a bigger business. So he brought equipment from Taiwan and China, and we grew that company into a $100 million gross company. And we became like the biggest manufacturer of zirconia. So much so that we could actually buy our raw materials from mainly from China, and then resell it back to China because we were so efficient at making a beautiful product. So my goal is I've spent some time at the bench, so I had more hair back then, but I had a good time. I worked in my lab for about 26 years doing work for ornithologists. And my lab was in Seattle, Washington. Beautiful place except for the rain. And I really enjoyed my time there. Now I live in Phoenix, Arizona. So it's a paradigm shift from 300 days of rain to 300 days of sunshine. But all the golf you can play, so I love it. So we're going to get into this material science about zirconia. So my goal is actually to not promote ADITE materials, but to give you some general information about this material. It's so misunderstood. So there's so many misnomers, there's so many misconceptions about what this white powder is. And so my goal is to actually give you some information about the material so you can make good choices as to what works for you in your lab or in your dental practices. There are times when I'll have a lot of clinicians in my classes. For example, in McCormick Center in Chicago, I had about 100 or so dentists that wanted to know about this material. One of the things I also found out is that if the dentists don't know the material science and what they're putting into the patient's mouth, they really don't know how to request which material is going to work for them. Okay. So that's just a slight background of what dental materials are progressing, namely feldspathic ceramics to nanoceramics and now to zirconia. We know from experience and from all the studies that have been done that this material is definitely here to stay. Okay. So in 2010, approximately 22% of the restorations that were made out of zirconia. And you can see the progression. You can see how much we have progressed as far as from 2010, seeing 22% to 35.2% in 2015, now 72% and above, more like 75% of the restorations that are done in a dental lab in the US are zirconia-made restorations. Now, they can be a single restoration, a 3-unit bridge, 6-unit bridge. They can be placed on polyether ketone or PEEK materials for all and four purposes and also for implant types of dentistry. So it has multiple uses. It's not just a one-trick pony. Okay? So the more you know about this material, the more you know about zirconia, you can make some really good choices as to which zirconia works well for you. So we're going to get into like 3Y, 4Y, and 5Y zirconia. If you're choosing to do mass amounts of zirconia use, like on an all-on-4 type of restoration, there are so many variables, so many tricks that you need to learn so they don't break. Okay? And if you wanted to do, let's just say, a veneer with zirconia, even though you can't etch zirconia, you can still make it work as a veneer if you know some of the concepts to use. And so we're going to get into that a little bit. By the way, this is interactive, so you can stop me if you have a question, and hopefully I can answer it. So just as a basic review of how zirconia comes into your lab. First, it goes through a mining process. 80 to 90% of the zirconia is mined in Australia. Okay, and I'll give you the reasons for that. But there are deposits in Utah. We have lots of deposits in Ukraine, and South Africa has quite a few. The reason that Australia is predominant in mining zirconia is because of the radioactivity level. And we're going to talk about that, which is a really big issue with materials in dentistry. So 80% of the zirconia is mined in Australia. And I'll show you the next picture will show you exactly what it looks like. All of that zirconia, all of it, 100% of the zirconia goes to China. Okay, so now there's all kinds of weird concepts about why does Chinese zirconia come into the US? They have the worldwide patent on something called yttria. Okay? Yttria is a stabilizing agent that is actually incorporated into zirconia so that it can be made into pucks and discs and so on and so forth, and it becomes millable at that point. So China has large factories where they do particle sizing, they add the yttria, they bleach it, and then they send it off to a company like Toso, which is in Japan. Now, Toso is one of the best companies in the world for further refining it and particle sizing it, checking the radioactivity levels, doing all the necessary tests to make sure that this can be placed in the patient's mouth. So from Australia to China to Japan, and then it's distributed to most of the world for manufacturing purposes. So from raw sand to cleaning, the bleach process, particle sizing, and we're going to tell you, I'll tell you more about what the particle size involves, which zirconia to choose and which to avoid. Okay. The addition of yttria, the formulation, and the pressing of the disc, and then it comes to your lab for CAD/CAM processing.
Does all zirconia on in a block or a disc now have yttria added?
Yes, yes. Without yttria, you cannot stabilize it. It looks like sand. So here it is. From raw material mining to the final restoration. So this is how it's mined in large quantities in Australia. And you cannot compress sand. So you have to use this material called yttria. And then it stabilizes it and it becomes cohesive at the right particle size. So we're dealing with 6 to 12 microns. Now the diameter of the human hair is about 100 microns. So you can see that this particle size is very, very small. And this is one of the reasons why you don't want so much dust in your lab. You want to use adequate suction and things like that so that you don't inhale this. Okay, this is actually the zirconia particle size is much smaller than feldspathic ceramic. So you have to really take some precautions to make sure that you're not breathing this material.
Is all raw material reddish brown?
Yes, some of it is reddish brown, some of it is lighter brown in color. Yeah, so both actually. So this may not be medical grade zirconia, this could be industrial grade zirconia. Here's what the medical grade zirconia looks like. So it's a lot more, it's closer to the sand that you would find at the beaches, right? So this is mined in Australia and goes, all of it goes, is shipped to Australia, to China. Okay, so when the material is ready, there are 3 types of processing, okay? In other words, 3 types of pressing. So there's a colloidal emulsion process, and we're talking about material that is refined and ready for pressing. So you have colloidal emulsion process, you have uniaxial pressing, and cold isostatic pressing. So this is really important and critical for you to know as a user of zirconia. Not all methods are right for the dental industry. Okay? All of them do work, but in my opinion and estimation, and all the companies that I've worked with, we've always installed the cold isostatic pressing. And it's because this is, I feel this is the best way to make zirconia. The density is correct, and we always keep it at 65 MPa because it can be milled in your milling systems. So colloidal emulsion process is basically like making tofu. You know, I'm sure you've all made tofu at home. Just kidding. So you're basically mixing a little bit of liquids and acids, water into a solution, okay, of powder, and then you're letting a sieve process work. So basically you're just withdrawing all the water from it so it gets dehydrated. And at that point, it's already in a mold, okay? So it can be surfaced to resurface with milling machines, and depending on which type of milling machine that you're using, it's ready for milling at your lab. Okay. That's the easiest method of making zirconia. There are some big inherent problems with colloidal emulsion. If the process is not accurate, you will get minute fractures and bubbles already in the green state. Okay. And so this, sometimes if you add colorants to it, it gets trapped in those little void areas. In my estimation, I don't think this is the best way to make zirconia, but it works. The next one is uniaxial pressing. Uniaxial pressing is basically taking some material and compressing it from 2 different sides. Okay, so uniaxial pressing is relatively inexpensive. You're applying 20 tons of pressure to it, and it forms a disc. At that point, you're curing it in the ovens, the large capacity ovens. You're burning out the trace elements like the yttria, and then it's ready for use. So I really do advocate the cold isostatic pressing. So you should be asking your manufacturer or supplier, what type of pressing are you using to manufacture these discs? And if it's not cold isostatic pressing, chances are that you may get some issues with the disc. If it's cold isostatic pressing or CIP, you are assured that this disc has the correct density of 65 MPa, and that's what we recommend, so that your tools are working. You can produce maybe 200 to 300 millings at a time before you need to change your tools. Okay, so at 65 MPa, we're finding out that your material will work really well in your milling machines. So uniaxial pressing, the problem with this is that you have two very hard sides, the upper side and the lower side at 125 MPa. And this is, in my opinion, not a very good way to make zirconia, although it's relatively inexpensive. And I used to notice with my rolling machines that after 25 to 30 mils, I would see sparks flying off. So that means
You would do what?
I would see sparks flying
Oh,
off the tools.
Oh.
Which means that it's actually grinding a very hard surface. When it gets to the inside of the disc, then it becomes more user-friendly and all that. But herein lies the problem. If you're dipping that in any kind of solution to color it, you're going to get somewhat uneven density or absorption. Any questions on that? Okay. All right, so here's the raw material powder. This is at about 12 microns. You know, again, this is very, very small particles. You cannot isolate one grain and look at it because with your human eye, you will not see it. So the only way to see this is with a scanning electron microscope. I had the privilege of working at SageMax, where we had a big test facility. We had a scanning electron microscope with an X-ray detection device. So you could actually see the structure of any type of zirconia or any type of powder. And then we use flexural analysis machines to test biaxial flexural strength, various spectrophotometers to look at colors and be able to see which zirconia absorbs colors better and which don't, and what particle size. So this is about 10 microns. And you might say, well, you know, I really don't need to know all this information, but I think the more information you know, the better choices you're going to make and the fewer problems you're going to have eventually.
Between the three processes, we all know that we have a number that we, you know, key into our milling machines. How does, and I don't mean to get ahead of you, but how does that number relate to the manufacturing process?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So for your purpose, in order for your tools to work, your machines to have some longevity and not break down, you need to look at the density of the material first. So
That's, yes, I figured it was a density issue.
So the best machine longevity is at 65 MPa, between 65 to 75 MPa. And that's sort of like hard chalk, okay? I mean, it's still cohesive. It should not break, especially at the margins and the interproximal areas. But you should be able to use, you should do 200 to 300 restorations with one set of tools before it should even be a factor, okay? And by the way, to look at the tools, you look at it under a microscope, maybe 10 to 20 hour, and you'll be able to see some jagged edges or some issues with it. At that point, you want to change it. So not all milling systems and machines will actually give you an error. You'll have to judge as to what your milling crowns look like, milled crowns look like. So that, but I would constantly look at my tools to make sure that they didn't have jagged edges and things like that. There's really no hard and fast rules to changing tools. It just depends on whether or not you're getting good mills or not. Okay. So the most important and critical factor in any material that you use in your lab is radioactivity levels. And so a few years ago, before FDA really clamped down on materials, there were some zirconia that had come from China, and they were used on the East Coast and specifically in Rhode Island and also in New York. and patients were having all kinds of issues. So they cut them out, you know, they were inflammation of gums and poisoning basically. They found out that they were well above the radioactivity level that a person should have in their soft tissue area. So this is one of the reasons why FDA started to collaborate with the ISO standards, and then we came up with something that resembles a good material that should have the right properties and also very biocompatible. Okay, so please understand that there are no ISO standards for zirconia. We are just piggybacking off the ceramic portion of it. So it's actually called ISO 1372. You don't really need to know that, but it's good to ask your manufacturer to give you some sort of report on how much radioactivity level you have in the material. Because it's sort of incumbent upon you as a material producer of crowns and stuff like that, that you need to know all these basic information. So if ever there is a question where the patient is having problems or issues and things like that, if you have not pre-recorded all of these things, you will not be able to give a good answer to your dentist. So again, the standards are for 1372. So I would call my manufacturer and say, you know, can you provide me isotopic results or radioactivity results for the material I'm using? And you should probably do this for your ceramics also, because you know it's important for you to document everything. And now we're getting into areas where, you know, everything's controlled, and you know they can always come back and say, point a finger at you and say, you did not use the right material. And then you get into legal issues, and we want to totally avoid this. So the good companies like ADAT will always provide you good information about their materials and how they've researched and developed. The classification, you should know this also. All of this falls under the classification of type 2 class 5. Okay. I would not use any material that is type 2 class 6 because I feel that it's too weak. So anything less than 800 MPa falls into a different classification. It's type 2 class 6. Anything over 800 MPa is quite allowable in our industry. You can probably do a single restoration or a full arch bridge. Although I feel that at 1100 or 1050 to 1100 to 1200, you're completely safe. That is strong enough, fracture toughness wise, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So just the core values, I mean, you know all of these things. Biocompatibility issues, it's obviously very high strength. Toughness is very good, excellent aesthetic properties. By the way, you know, there's so many misnomers. You see this white material and people say, is it a metal? Is it a ceramic? What is the classification, right? On the periodic table, it's actually listed as a metal, but it certainly does not behave like a metal, and it does not behave like a ceramic. It's somewhere in between. So I'm sure you've noticed this where you've done a large bridge and because of the thermal expansion and contraction, you're doing your last glaze and it breaks. So here, I think some material understanding is very critical, and you can totally avoid this, by the way. You can totally avoid any fractures. They're called Griffith flaws, actually.
What was the word?
Griffith flaws. You can actually research this. And they're very minute, microscopic flaws or propagations in the crown as you're heating and cooling it. And another misnomer is that zirconia has a self-healing property. It does not. It actually is quite the opposite. If you develop these flaws in the zirconia, the dentist grinds on it and you see sparks flying, that is a complete no-no. Okay? At that point, you have to ask your dentist, say, hey, how much grinding did you do? Oh yeah, I ground it, you know, it was very high, and then I polished it and put it, you know, seated the crown. That crown will eventually fail. It's very unfortunate because the dentist is really not knowledgeable about how to treat this material. The only way to treat this material after you've ground it a lot is to recenter it. In other words, you have to put it back into the ceramic oven. This is the last process you do. You glaze it, obviously. Put it back into the, prior to the glaze. Put it back into the oven, raise the temperature to 1,000 degrees and hold it in air. What this does is it actually seals these flaws. Okay? And then you can glaze it back and send it to the dentist. This is really, really critical because sometimes in the marginal ridge areas or wherever the dentist is ground or the crown is too thin. By the way, you should never go below 0.3 millimeter on the occlusal surface. Even keep it at 0.5 millimeter, that's the optimum level. So any dentist that is grinding it below and you can hold it to the light and you see transparency through it, you know that this crown is not strong enough. Go ahead.
That temperature of 1,000 degrees, is there a time factor you would have to hold
Yeah,
it?
hold it for 5 minutes in air, no, not in vacuum. By the way, there's another trick to sealing flaws in the ceramics. So if you have a flaw in a ceramic, most people are kind of throwing up their hands and saying, man, I can't seal this. This is the exact same process you would use. You raise it to 1,000 degrees in air, not in vacuum, and leave it there for 5 minutes, and the fracture will seal.
You mean the lithium disilicate?
Lithium disilicate, glass, ceramics, same concept.
Okay.
Yeah. This is a really interesting point because a lot of times you will see these flaws in the ceramics, but not in, because the material is so dense, zirconia is so dense, you will not see these flaws. But you can certainly see it in ceramics, right? There'll be a very apparent crack, and you can seal this.
Lithium disilicate is the same temperature, 1,000 degrees?
Yeah. So you have to probably sandblast the glaze off and then reseal it and then reglaze. Guaranteed it'll work. Yes, sir.
So you're saying like I have a full contour zirconia when after I glaze it, then a hairline fracture.
Yeah.
So after that, I can go back.
Yes, you can. Yeah. So depending on your glaze temperature, if it's below the glaze temperature, raise the temperature to 1,000 degrees Celsius. Hold it in air for 5 minutes, and you will see actually the crack disappear.
Wow. Because usually I'll throw it away and give me another one.
No.
The finished product is like, oh, it's in an hour.
Yeah, trust me, anything that you've experienced, I've experienced it like 1,000 times. You know?
That's good to know.
That's why I lost some of my hair.
I think 1,000 degrees is over the glaze temperature.
Yeah,
It's gonna be
different.
over glaze, so what would you do? Sandblast the glaze off of it?
Yeah,
maybe,
yeah.
Then center it, recenter it, and then come back and glaze.
Yes, you are correct. Yeah, because now the next session that I'll be doing is on biomic materials, which is a flowable ceramic material that you can use instead of a glaze, sand and glaze material. So that temperature is 750 at its highest point. It's a low fusing material. So if you would have to sandblast it and just recenter it.
Just a question, because we're talking about it. Emax, I'll just use the brand name. I mean, 850 is the centering temperature for that. So if you have a finished crown and
Yeah, you
you
would.
know a tapered margin, 1,000 degrees seems it would deform that.
Yeah, I take it back because you can go up to that temperature, but hold it in air for 5 minutes. Yeah, so at the highest, like prosthetic ceramic has a higher melting point. So you would actually take it just below the glaze temperature, whatever the temperature is, whatever glaze you're using. And just by protocols of the manufacturer, let's just say lithium disilicate is at what, 850 or something like that. Go below that a little bit, maybe 25 degrees, yeah. So I know for zirconia, it's 1,000 degrees.
Yes. And that that regimen is, I think, what Vita recommended, years ago when.
Yeah, Dr. Giordano.
That process. Yes.
Yeah, I've worked with him a little bit. You know, he actually was sitting in one of my classes, and you know, he came up to me. He says the teacher becomes a mentor at some point. You know, the pupil becomes a mentor. You know, but I've worked significantly with him as well as Dr. Sorensen at the University of Washington, doing a lot of studies as far as chewing cycles and things like that.
Very good.
By the way, we're still learning and growing with this material. You know, I mean, it's been almost 15, 20 years now that I was first introduced to this material, and we're still learning new things about it. So, you know, this is just a schematic of how we do things at ADITE. Research and development, which is part of my deal, the dry pressing, and then the isostatic pressing. So here, please understand that this is a more expensive way of making zirconia. So the dry pressing is the uniaxial pressing, okay? And then you transfer it, encase it in a polyurethane material in a vacuum, okay? And then it's immersed in a liquid medium, and then 20 tons of pressure is applied during the isostatic state. What this does is it actually creates a very even homogeneous density. So when pressure is applied from all different sides or points, you have a material that is extremely uniform in density. You don't find this with uniaxial pressing or the colloidal emulsion process. So that is the big advantage to isostatic pressing. And then the pre-sintering here, after the press is complete, the material is loaded into large capacity ovens that you can walk into, and then it's pre-sintered or burnt out, so to speak. The cohesive elements of the material, like the yttrium and things like that, are burnt out. Sometimes polyurethane as a binder. It's kept at 1,000 degrees for 3 days. And that burns out all the elements and purifies it, so it's ready for milling at that point and shaping. The CNC process is when it's milled into forms and shapes, and there's bands put around it, or it's in whatever shape that you want. And then it's all tested. Every material that you should get should always have an instruction for use by the manufacturer, as well as all the ISO standards listed on it. Right? If you don't have that, and a lot number, and you have to record the lot number, by the way. I know it's a tedious process, but every crown you make, every case that you do, should have a lot number or a sticker attached to it. And I speak from experience because there were quite a few crowns that I did from a batch of material, and they were failing, and I didn't know how to respond to the dentist. And it sort of just kind of made me look bad. So always good to sort of pre-record everything you can. I know it's a tedious process, but I think now the FDA actually requires us to do this. Production flow of zirconia for ADITE, dry pressing, isostatic pressing, and pre-sintering, and finally it's packaging. There's always a lot of questions about tetrahedral zirconia and cubic zirconia. So there's a lot of misnomers about this. Well, you know, cubic zirconia, yeah, you can make it look really glassy, and you know, its transparency level, its translucency level is very good. By the way, transparency is not applied to our product; it should be translucency. I have a lot of trouble promoting this to my Chinese friends because they always say transparency. No, it's translucency. But you have to keep it at a certain opacity level too. I mean, we can make zirconia look like glass, where it's actually transparent, but it's so brittle and the value is so low. So anytime you're formulating zirconia, you have to look at the translucency level and say, is this going to work in the mouth? Okay. Everybody wants to have a high translucent zirconia. I don't know. I mean, it's yes and no. I mean, there are certain occasions where you actually do need a high translucent zirconia, something like 57%. Okay. But in general, we found that on average, most patients can have a zirconia that's between 45 to 50%, and that's perfect, or even below in some cases. Not every time will you experience cases where you need high translucency. You know, I used to see patients all the time with almost zero translucency. And those are the times where you have to choose a different zirconia or use your cam system where you're actually lowering the crown when you're placing the crown in the cam system, okay? So you don't get so much translucency. We have a zirconia that I had a hand in promoting this or developing it. It's called 3D Pro. Again, I'm a little bit biased, but I feel that this is one of the best zirconia out in the market. But if it's not placed well in the cam system, you're going to get very high translucency. But if it's placed too far down where you're getting a lot of chroma, but not really a lot of translucency, you have to use it in the center. Okay? And then find a way to adjust this, and you'll get beautiful restorations. So tetrahedral is a stronger material. Okay? The atomic structure is different. Cubic is a little bit different. So when we are developing different materials, we use certain percentages of both in order to get the perfect material. Okay? So if you have one too much and one too little, or vice versa, you're going to get a material that really doesn't work well. So learning, growing with a lot of pain and effort. This is something I experienced when we developed something at SafeMax. Oops, I shouldn't say that because my friend wouldn't like that. So I came into my lab, in my test lab, and I saw one spot one day, and I thought, it's just an anomaly. But as the week progressed, I was seeing all kinds of fractures. And at that point, we had sold, I don't know, $100,000 of material, something like that. And it was a learning experience for us because obviously that we're breaking during the milling state. So my point is that you really need to know and understand what the material science is and how this material is produced. There are a lot of times when a manufacturer will send you a material and it sits in a humid air environment, and it will actually develop these fractures. So you need to store it in a dry environment. Make sure that you know the formulation. You can ask the manufacturer, hey, well, what percentage of yttrium are you using? What is the percentage composition of tetrahedral versus cubic? You all know this. I mean, you know the advantages, the materials behind it, and what works and what doesn't work. Okay, so another thing to note is that you need to constantly check your burrs. I think we've touched on that. Make sure that you are getting really complete mills with no fractures. Anytime you're seeing a fracture, you should be able to mill your zirconia to the thinnest amount. Okay? So in other words, you can have margins down to almost 1 or 2 tenths. And if you're not experiencing that, you're not using a good zirconia. So mostly dentists will do a light chamfer to a medium chamfer, and that's perfect for this type of restorations. Dentists do not have to be very aggressive with their preparations. You can advocate a medium chamfer, and it's going to make life easy for you also, instead of using a shelf or a table type of restoration. Always tell them that you need a medium to a light chamfer. Okay, so again, I'm just promoting the iodide material. We make 3 or 4 different types of zirconia to meet all the different demands that are out in the industry. All different applicable solutions as far as systems, whether it's a zircozan system or a Roland system or 98 millimeter, we even do 100 millimeter. This is a restoration that I made at my previous job. And I wanted to backlight it and show you that translucency is very important in the anterior region and not so important in the posterior region. Okay? So here again, if you're gaining experience and lining it up in your CAM software, you can actually change the translucency levels very easily. Okay? So tilt the restoration so that you're getting more chroma towards the back and then more translucency towards the front. You know, we hate this redo word. You know, in the dental industry, redo is really a bad word. So you want to always have, there was a lab that I walked into, big lab, that was having 30% redo. And they thought that that was an acceptable rate. I said, no way. You need to make sure that your material is good. Whether it was shipping or breakage, cases coming back to the California lab. So we revised the processes from design to material choice, all the way to finishing materials and how to finish. So their redo rate went from 36% to about 5% within like a couple of months. So here, patients need to understand what the aesthetic results are going to be. And the dentist is actually relying a lot on you to supply that type of information. Should I use felspathic crowns, or should I use a veneer, or should I use a full crown, or should I use zirconia? There are a lot of material choices, lithium disilicate. So here, having some information and knowledge about the material is really going to help you service your accounts. I've found that with zirconia, I think it's a very reliable material if you use it well. Here's something that I did a while ago where I was trying to replicate old dentition. And here you notice that I have very little translucency because the patient did not have on the opposing arch any type of translucency, or very minimum, I should say. And he didn't want to go through orthodontics. It was an older patient. So we tried to replicate beautiful dentition using all the different chroma levels and things like that. And still, he was actually in a CEO-CR relationship. He was a patient for one of the pathologists, so he had really sharp dentition. If you look at the incisals and stuff. So one of the things that is really good for me is to do my own trial testings. As a denturist, you're allowed to do that, especially if you have a dentist in the building, that it even makes it really good. So this is one of the trial dentures. I'm doing a middle denture for a patient, just to test. So, you know, it's really critical to trial test anything that is made. So many companies I've found, or some companies will make a type of material that won't go through this process of IQ, OQ, PQ, which is initial qualification, operational, and performance qualifications. They'll put out the material without really having a lot of data. This is where the problems come in, where you're using a material that may have not been tested completely, but it's in your hands and it's in your lab. So it's critical that you ask for some of this data. Say, hey, how long have you tested? How many patients has this material been tested on? Okay. So strength versus translucency. Here again, you need to know a little bit about the 3Y, 4Y, 5Y. I believe that this understanding will help you develop some really good association with your dentist to actually advise them on what to use. So not always will you use a 3Y, not always will you use a 5Y or a 4Y, okay? But more often than not, you're going to use a hybrid material, sort of a do-it-all. One material might fit all of your projects, but then the other 10%, let's just say 90% of the projects, but the 10% of the projects might require something that is more opacious or stronger. Okay. So for example, the 5Y or the 3Y is the strongest material. Y refers to the yttria content. Okay. The 3Y, 4Y, and 5Y have different yttria contents. And you'll notice here that as it's really blurry back here, but you'll see that when you transition from 3Y, 4Y to 5Y, you lose a little bit of the structure, relatively speaking, but you gain translucency. Okay? So if you were to use a 5Y material, which is predominantly cubic material, you are going to gain a lot more translucency, but really lose the strength. So here, in my opinion, I feel that if you can find a material that is good at everything, Okay, it has the perfect amount of translucency. You can adjust the translucency in your CAM software, or you want to have a material that's over 1,000 MPa or 1,050 MPa and above. Okay. Anything less than that is suspect, especially if you have very thin proximal areas, and also it's not going to have great translucency. So in my opinion, I think you need to use a hybrid material, polychromatic layering stuff. We've developed something called 3D Pro, which my friends have used here. In my opinion, I think this is one of the best materials out there. And having worked for different companies, I feel that we have come up with something that looks like layered ceramics.
With the, so are you suggesting with the, say the 5Y as, compared to the 3Y, while you have greater translucency, these materials manufactured this way, while they have greater translucency, do they also fire at a lower do they center at a lower temperature?
They do, yes, because it's finer grained. So let's just say if you're doing an anterior case, older lady that doesn't have too many forces happening up front, it's okay to use a 5Y material. The limitation is going to be a 3-unit bridge. Okay, it's going to be mostly cubic material, but it's going to look okay. You have to be really careful with cubic zirconia because it tends to have a lower value. Okay, so some companies will make a 5Y zirconia, rated at 650 MPa. By the way, a lot of these figures are exaggerated. I can tell you that from experience, because when I used to do the slicing and dicing and testing, I would find that they don't use the protocols for testing. They actually make their own testing. And because we don't have ISO standards written for this material, they will take 10 pieces, they'll break them, and they'll get a result from the 10 pieces. The ISO standard states that you should always use 30 pieces. So documentation becomes very blurry at times, and they want to always give you the high figure, 650 MPa, 720 MPa. When in fact, if you really do some critical analysis of the material, you'll find that the figures are way below. So I advise my company, ADITE, to always print or publish numbers that are acceptable in the lower range. So if anybody does test it, they'll find that it's actually higher. So 1,050 is our material. And we find that this material is universal in the sense you can make veneers out of it, inlay onlays if you wished, full crowns, 14-unit bridges. And it's beautiful on all-on-4 restorations. If you're using a peak material, do the individual restorations, finish the crowns, and then you use a material like Rely-X, place them on there, and you're good to go. So an all-on-4 restoration, which is a higher-end restoration, will give you the most issues and problems, especially if you're using a full zirconia. Okay. Zirconia in a mass quantity is extremely difficult to deal with because you have all this expansion and contraction and the CTE changes and things like that. So if you are wanting to do full contour zirconia all-on-4s, there's a way to do it. You have to follow the protocols. You have to make sure that the cooling rate is very, very long. Okay, no less than maybe an hour to cool a full arch restoration. And when the platform comes down to 400 degrees is your idle temperature, you take the restoration out, you cover it with a ceramic bowl so that the convection heat flow. Before even that, you place a fibrous material, the tray material that you find sold by different companies. Place it onto the bridge and then transfer it to a platform and then cover it with a ceramic bowl. So there's two things that happen with that process, and this is all by experience. The convection heat flow and the dissipation of heat actually is retarded. Okay? You don't want this heat to just fly off the restoration. That is a big no-no for thicker zirconia. Now, for single restorations, you can actually lower the platform and everything's fine. You won't have issues. Because that is a very small, density as compared to a thick bridge. And does that make sense?
Yes.
So tricks of the trade.
Question.
Yes.
I heard you mentioning something about we can make veneers out of this 5Y.
Yes.
5Y is the highest translucency.
Yes.
What material do you use to bond those? Can you bond them like you bond an emax?
Yes. Yeah. That is a great question, actually. So a few years ago, people would say you cannot make veneers out of this material. The reason is because it doesn't etch. And
Yeah.
so the bonding process is incomplete.
What should I say to my dentist when they ask me that question? Is just, do they salinate them? Do they?
Yeah, so here's how you would do it. You would increase your cement gap, okay? Initially, when you're designing it, you would increase the cement gap by a few, maybe like 0.2, I think. And
And
then,
it only goes by 0.5.
oh,
My
okay,
shape.
okay. Yeah, you can increase it to the next level.
Yes.
Okay, fabricate your veneer, sandblast it, spray it with a spray glaze internally, okay, fire it, and then etch it.
Okay, so creating my own bonding layer.
Exactly.
Okay.
So nothing will bond unless it's etched. And then you can use.
No, because I was at a different lecture and they said that zirconia you can bond them, there was a special material. That was the first time I hear that.
Yeah, no, there are acids that will etch it, but it's like a 2-day process.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's not like something can be done the same.
no, you don't want to handle hydrofluoric acid.
So I
in
don't
your
want to
mouth.
recommend something to my dentist before I'm 100% sure. That's why I'm asking different.
Yeah, I've done some
Yeah.
veneers with, using this concept.
I've done Maryland Bridge and the wings, this is what I did. Actually, I put a little using porcelain on the wing, fired it. Of course, I created the space, grind it down a little bit, sandblasted it, etched it.
Perfect, yeah, that's a perfect way of doing it.
Yeah.
So, instead of it being so tedious, you can use a spray glaze.
Yeah.
And that sort of suffices.
Well, that's
That's about the only way to get that uniformity though,
Mhm.
Yeah.
it's the spray, otherwise you have something pooling.
Well, I kept the margin not touched because I wanted to go back seal.
You can put wax around it and then spray glaze it,
Yeah, that's
clean
good.
the wax off.
What about using a primer, like monobond primer, monobond plus primer to help with the pigmentation?
Yeah, that is actually acceptable. Yeah, you need to silinate it or use a monobond. That's the clinician will do that.
Yes, I was gonna say that if you do that in the lab, and it's not cemented immediately, it's for no purpose at all.
Yes.
It has to be done within like maybe 10 minutes
Yeah.
or so.
In my opinion, veneers are some of the most trickiest restorations you'll do in your lab. Veneers and porcelain butt margins used to always give me trouble. But it's doable. So, with a material like 3D Pro that my friend is using, it has beautiful translucency. You can adjust the translucency, and it has really nice chroma. So if you use your CAM software,
I can melt like 0.2, reduction on the margin.
and because of the way the material is composed, it's very high density and also has 1050 MPa.
Does the result of those zirconia materials, does it vary based on the milling machine?
It does, yeah. You have to have a machine that is extremely precise. In
Okay,
other words,
so if we're gonna be using this product, we have to have the right milling machine to get the right result that this product can give us.
I would say most milling machines these days are extremely precise. The spindles are good.
Good with Roland?
Roland is great. I use Roland for a long time. Those are workhorses in my opinion.
Okay.
I've used Roland's. I'm a Gearbach. I used to work for Digital Dental that made dent mills. So, the machines are getting very good right now. We do sell machines if you're ever interested.
Yeah, I'm thinking about starting to, want to try and make it veneers out of zirconia.
Yeah, I think that it's,
Because I'm starting to like those results better than the Emax, going through the process of waxing and this and that.
if you do a beautiful zirconia veneer, in my opinion, it has higher strength than your normal feldspathic or lithium disilicate.
The only worries I have about veneers is them coming off, not breaking.
Right.
That's the only worries I
Right.
have. And the thing is, even if the veneer comes off the tooth, we still get the blame for it.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, why did it come off? Why are you asking me? I'm not the one.
Yeah, so,
I don't even know what cement you use, what bonding material.
so even with full crowns made out of zirconia restoration, what I used to do, you know, not all dentists have the same skill level, just like technicians. So I used to create some mechanical reinforcements in there for some curvatures and things like that. So I used to take a tapered burr, triangular burr, and then I would carve some lines in there. So that it just gives you more mechanical, you know, some retention.
Retention.
Yeah.
In the
Type of
soft stage?
retention. Pardon me?
In the soft stage?
No, this is after it's completed.
Okay.
This is your last step, and then you would sandblast it.
Okay.
So, but be very sure to not create heat, you know, where sparks are flying, so be very gentle. But you do need some mechanical retention. Because if the dentist has prepped something that looks like, you know, a ball, you are not gonna have mechanical retention. So you need to have, you know, some mechanical retention and some chemical retention.
Only on one surface.
All the way around. I used to do
No,
that.
I'm saying only on one surface, or you're doing this to the veneer, what about the wall that's gonna stick to like the tooth? The doctor's supposed to do that? too?
Yeah, he will silinate, he will do his thing. He doesn't have to create that type of retention.
Okay.
So industry strength-wise, we do a lot of flexural analysis tests. The two main components of testing is, so biaxial flexural strength, you don't really need to know a lot of this information, but just know that we use two types of testing predominantly, biaxial bending test as well as the 3-point bending test. Okay? These tests are relatively the same, relatively speaking. You get very high results when you do the biaxial test. I like to do a protocol where I make my discs 1.3 millimeters thick, because most of the dentists will have a 1.3 millimeter axial wall reduction. So I try to use that as a standard. Okay. Ask your manufacturer if they've done these tests and provide you the data. Okay, so high to low. More specifically, you're going to get test results that are lower if you do a 4-point versus a 3-point bending test. Types of zirconia. Now we talked about the 4Y, 5Y, and the 3Y. You can see that the results look phenomenal as you get it more into the 5Y and the hybrid types of zirconia.
When you say hybrid, what do you mean by that?
Hybrid is a mixture of cubic zirconia as well as tetrahedral zirconia.
Two different types of one thing.
Yeah, just a hybrid. You know, very similar to hybrid using plastic as a composite material like feldspathic material and plastic material. A material like Ultra, let's just say, or Vita Enamic, something like that, which is more of a hybrid material. The similar thing we do with zirconia, but it's the same zirconia component. Fracture toughness is probably a really critical issue. You need to know about fracture toughness and what this does. Ask for the fracture toughness. It should always be below 5. It should always be 5 and below. So fracture toughness is what is going to produce longevity in your restorations. So here you can see the fracture toughness levels of 3Y, 4Y, and 5Y, and you can see the sweet spot. That sweet spot will enable you to choose the right material. Very easy and fast way of doing zirconia. You smooth, you cut, and you sand. Okay, you guys are all familiar with this.
You don't have pre-shaded.
Materials.
This is not pre-shaded.
No, this is white zirconia.
Why is it from there? Okay.
I think people still like to use white zirconia. There's a trick to actually staining and glazing, or staining it, pre-staining it. What I generally like to do is I'll paint on my incisals, Okay, and my effect colors, you can get blue, gray, violet, whatever you want to do. And then I like to seal that before I dip it. So how you seal this is very, very simple. You don't have to use polypropylene glycol or some expensive stuff like that. You can just use distilled water. Okay? Use some distilled water, use some food coloring with it, so you know that you're placing an even layer. After you pre-color your incisals, brush it with 1 coat or 2 coats of distilled water. What this does, it actually seals the next color from going into it. Okay? It's a trick I learned from experimentations. And then you dip it. So your body color will not overwhelm the incisal colors. Does that make sense?
And the same process for a 3-unit bridge, but mainly the pond.
Yeah, great question. Okay, so for Pontics, as you know, it's going to saturate faster. So you want to coat the entire Pontic prior to doing anything. Okay. So coat it with 2 coats and then apply your incisal colors and then dip it. And
distilled water?
Yes, distilled water. I use some red food coloring in it so that you know, I can see the layers that I put on there. Very simple, very, very good technique. And this is, a lot of people have issues like with this, because they'll see a Pontic that is much more saturated than the abutment teeth. This is a good way to actually make all the chroma saturations even. We used to do this. I used to do this where you cut back a little bit and then you appreciate it, and then you apply, you center it, and then you apply some ceramics to it. But now we're getting into more and more refined zirconia where they look like layered ceramics.
Yeah.
So, you know, in my opinion, you don't have to have all these different or extreme ceramic skills. I think you can just use a material like 3D Pro with the Biomic, which I'll be talking about, and you get this incredible looking restorations. You can actually match 8 to 9 very easily. So this was the traditional way of doing zirconia. Now we have more and more better products that you can use to simplify your life, basically.
What stain do you use when you are working on a pre-shaded zirconia?
Yeah, so pre-shaded zirconia is very tricky. You don't want to apply, are you talking about the green
Well,
state?
Yeah, well, it's just a zirconia that you have to adjust the shade, like
Yeah.
taking it from A1 to A3, for
Yeah.
example. What stain do you use?
You know, that's a great question also. I think it's a hit and miss if you're using a pre-stain. You know, you can brush it. Some people have a neck for it, they can do it. But more often than not, they're gonna either have too much or too little.
Okay.
And this is one of the reasons why the advent of layered,
Even with
Chromatized
this,
it.
sometimes you don't get the right shade, so how do you correct it? Let's say you correct it with,
the only way to correct it is to use an external stain.
that's what I'm, yeah, the external stain that you use. what
Stay
is
for the next one, it's Biomic.
Generally just start with intaglio and interproximal,
Uh-huh.
you know, oranges or something like that.
Yeah. In my opinion, I think it's a hit and miss scenario. I mean, there's opaques on the market now where you can use it in the internal part of the crown and things like that. It just gets too messy. In my opinion, if you wanted to go from A1, let's just say you didn't have a disc, like an A3, and you only had A1, I would mill it out of an A1, but I would use an external flowable ceramic like the Biomic material that I'm going to be talking about. Some people ask me, is it meal? Yes and no. It's a little bit different than meal because it's finer grained. I'm going to be talking about that later. So yes, I think it's very easy now to transform an A1 into an A3 without much effort. All you have to do is like form a skin with a flowable ceramic and you're done. And it just takes seconds to do. So this is, you know, again, the fracture toughness we talked a little bit about. You know, we talked about the core values of zirconia. So Adite makes, I have to talk about Adite because I'm sponsored by it. We make a multi-layer, which is a 3D Pro, which is incredible material. And if you wanted to try one, I would give you a disc to try out. No problems, no questions asked.
I'll do that when I get my milling machine. I haven't got it yet.
Yeah, look into milling machines because they can be kind of complicated too.
Roland, most likely.
Yeah, Roman is good. Honor C, super perfect, and also multi-layer. Okay, we talked about 3Y already, have very high strength. It can be used for any indication in the mouth, and can have no more than 4 pounds span. This is kind of a gray area too, you know. Some people will say, hey, I can put a molar and a bicuspid. Generally speaking, I like to not go any more than 12 millimeters, just to be safe. We talked about 4Y. This can be used for indications where you want good aesthetics for veneers. Make sure that you have a bonding system, no more than 3 pontics. Then we talked about 5Y. This is very limited, generally between 650 MPa, so you want to only have 3. This is my favorite material of use right now. I had a hand in developing this with the scientists at AACD. We came to the conclusion that we should have something that meets the classification as well as is always above 1,000 MPa. So we don't make any materials that are below 1,000 MPa. It took some convincing, but they agreed. And right now we feel that we are probably the 2nd largest manufacturer in the world. We supply to about 130 countries. Our US branch is headed by me, myself, and I right now. So we're trying to make some inroads into the US market. So anybody that wants a sales job, please talk to me.
I have a question. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm just curious. I mean, it says the translucency almost 60%.
Yeah.
As I know about zirconia, is like the more translucent you get, the less strength.
Correct.
So how did they manage to give you like
Yeah.
over 1,000 strength with almost 60% translucency?
This is $1 million question. Okay, so we talked a little bit about translucency before you came in.
Okay.
But here's the deal. Most layered, so-called layered materials are packed in layers. Okay. So you measure out a small amount of material, you pack it, small amount of material, you pack it to form this layered look. Okay. So our concept, which is extremely distinctive in our industry, we don't do this. We think of a build-up process. Okay, so we've installed machines that actually builds up measured amounts of material without forming a layer. Extremely unique in our industry, and this is the key to our success, is that when you fire a restoration made out of 3D Pro, you will not see any demarcations. There will not be, guaranteed there will not be any layers, because that's the concept that we use.
What about the strength on the connectors for the bridge?
Yeah, so you would still follow the same protocols as anybody else. 12 millimeter square, and 3 by 4 in the posterior and 6 by 1 in the anterior. Now you can have some flexibility there if you wish, but by and large you want to keep it at that figure. Okay. So the other really good thing about or aspect about 3D Pro is the sintering process. Okay. So after the green state is complete, the leader of my company, Mr. Lee, is a genius actually. He's a mechanical engineer, and he's actually developed what they call a conveyor system of conveyor tunnel system of sintering this material. So you can imagine a tunnel system about that square, stretching from that room to the back of the room to the front. So when you place a green state disc, it travels for 24 hours and it gets cured through this tunnel system. So instead of putting it into a large capacity oven where the temperature variance is quite apparent, in other words, you can have a different temperature at the corner versus the middle and towards the back. This system is like toasting sandwich, okay, at one of these stores. So you put a sandwich here and then you increase the temperature as it goes, and then the entire sandwich is actually the same temperature all the way through. This is the key to success for our materials. So every zirconia that is made by AACD goes through this process of conveyor tunnel system. Very unique to our industry. The only company that I've worked for, or the only company I know that actually utilizes this. So the benefits to this type of system is that every grain, every minute particle is already cured, okay? Whereas if you were to put it in an oven, it's like, let's just say roasting beef or something. There you might have some red areas and some, overcooked areas. Convection ovens just don't give you the best sintering results, whereas a conveyor system gives you the perfect sintering. Now we also have all the liquids that you would want. If you choose to use like the white zirconia, I can work with you. Or if you're having good results, then great. We have all the different liquids that you would need for all the different types of zirconia to make. The sanded glaze, you can get a conventional system, similar to, let's just say, InSync. By the way, I'm really good friends with the owner of Jensen, so I never say anything bad about his materials. I think it's a great company. So we have something very similar. So coming soon, Biomic, which is the next series of slides, which is going to be extremely interesting. This is a testimonial that I wrote, and it's been used for print.
Would you back that up? Let me just take a picture of that.
So sure, this one.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, Biomic. I think you should wait for the Biomic one here soon. It's extremely important that you know this material. So this is in vogue right now. Polish versus glaze. We're going to cover this really quickly. So every restoration that I would glaze, I always polish. And here's the reason: because the optical properties change very quickly. Okay? So anytime you're sintering a restoration, you have an oxide layer that's formed on there. You want to get rid of that. So when you polish this material, I should say smooth this material, not really polish it. What you're doing is you're actually getting rid of this oxidation layer so light can penetrate right into it.
So basically, you're talking about removing the outside layer.
Exactly.
So it doesn't have to be polished. You can just grind.
You can sandblast most of it.
Sandblast it and put a stain on it and glaze.
Exactly. So on the
Yeah,
incisal,
it's not necessarily you have to run. Okay.
right. So in the incisal areas and the cusp areas, maybe the occlusal surface, just do a quick what do they call it? Magic wheel, the white wheels.
Yeah.
And that just takes you seconds, right? And the whole complexion of your crown is going to change. And how do I know this? I did a lot of optical studies on this. And it proves that once you remove that oxidation layer, you can get a restoration that looks really, really nice.
Totally different.
So we did some wear studies with Dr. Sorensen, and we found that if you polish your restoration, it has a much effective layer, wear attributes to it, even actually better than enamel. And these are studies that were done at the University of Washington. You can see veneering ceramic, with the thicker grains, does not wear very well. Polished glazed zirconia is here, and then glazed zirconia without the polish is here. So quick wheels, you can find this from just about any company that makes them. We have a new set of wheels that we use. This is one of my favorite pictures. So if you don't polish your occlusion surface, and obviously this is exaggerated, this is the results you will get with monolithic zirconia. Now, with feldspathic ceramic, it's going to be 10 times worse because it's like sandpaper. And there's nothing you can do about feldspathic ceramic because of its grain structure. It's just going to wear like sand. And this is why you find beautiful natural dentition being worn out in 10 years. It's because of the grain structure. Now, zirconia is way below as far as mastication process cycles that you use. It wears really nice. It does have sort of a self-polishing attribute to it. So as it wears, it'll actually self-polish a little bit, but much better than feldspathic ceramic. So here you can see in 3 years, without polishing, the abrasion factor is quite high. Okay, if you need a schematic, we have that also. I like to use this because it's fairly basic. And for people that are learning how to use colors and don't really know, the color mixing processes, you can just take it out of the bottle and use it, and it'll give you good results. This is our newest adventure here. We just unveiled this. It's a complete polishing fitting system, very inexpensive.
That's what the dentist was about.
For the lab. Yeah.
Dentist was about.
Dentists can use it if they want, but some dentists like to tinker with it. I mean, they should, if they do some minor adjusting, they should always polish it.
So when you said inexpensive, you're talking about $10?
Or if you buy 100 of them, maybe we could talk about it. This is the one that I did a long time ago, and I showed that to you. Sintering is extremely important, by the way. 90% of the issues that I have from people that don't get good results has to do with the sintering process. Okay? Everybody's oven fires differently. They have different elements and so on and so forth. Lack of calibration, what have you. Almost 90% of the problems are related to sintering. Bad coloration, yellow coloration, things falling apart in the oven, things like that, and mis-sintering. So you have to use a sintering oven that is a good oven with a silica carbide element. Okay. Now, silica molybdenum elements, you don't want to say that 10 times, are good elements. They work on the basis of having a glass formation. Okay. So every once in a while, when the oven is cool, you want to run your fingers on silica molybdenum elements, okay, to make sure that you have a glass layer. Now, if you're feeling really jagged areas and you're feeling rough areas, something is not right. And it's not going to give you optimum results. So try to purchase an oven that has silica carbide elements, like a Dikema oven or any of the 8i ovens. They're all made with, I actually changed their mind to use this elements, and so now they're compliant.
Ceramil, what do you think about that?
Ceramil, I think that they have
their own oven.
Yeah, I don't know what type of elements they use, but it's not the oven, it's the element. Yeah. So you want to use an oven that has, I would promote the silica carbide element.
So,
As opposed to a silica molybdenum element here. So the difference is that silica molybdenum has a longer lifespan, okay? But it works on a glass formation, so you have to make sure that it's nice and smooth. It has a layer of glass that's grown on the outside of the element. Silica carbide elements are extremely accurate. Actually, you never have to calibrate it. It's self-calibrating sort of. So you want to use an oven that has this. Now, the drawback to this is that it has a shorter lifespan. So once it goes, it's dead. You're done.
Do you know if the Sintra oven has the silica?
Yes, it has. The Sintra has this one here. Okay, so that's that. It looks like perfect sintering. It's going to give you good results. And then this is a little bit about our company, how we've grown. Every year we try to introduce some new products. What have you. We're worldwide, so we work with really good technicians. Our mission is to produce something that really does work for you in your lab. And here's our facility. It's in a beautiful part of China, although now we have USA affiliates here. We have our main distribution center is in Whittier, California, so we ship everything from California. Okay. A little bit about our company. Our newest invention is also the intraoral camera, very inexpensive. Indications for zirconia, we've covered that. The consumables, we have all different types of consumables if you want, relatively inexpensive, whether you want to mill wax, PMMA, or zirconia. And we can do a ROI, return on investment for you if you want to use one of our zirconias. We're worldwide, we have affiliations in over 130 countries. And then this is the flowable ceramic material. If you guys want to stay, I can do this presentation. I know it's about 1 minute right now. I sort of ran out of time.
This is like Mia.
Yeah.
Similar to me.
Yes and no.
Okay.
So this is a restoration I did with this material. You can see that this is a monolithic case, but I was able to create some really nice distinctive features on it. using the Biomic system. We always value our partnership with our clients, and I think with Biomic and the 3D Pro, you can really create some beautiful, beautiful restorations, and we can actually support you. And we have great, great technicians, and if you're having some issues or you want a Zoom class or something, we can also provide that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And if you want to go into Biomic, I don't know what the time factor is, but I can ask them. And that's a really good presentation.
Going back to the job offer, you guys have openings. Would you move me to California if I apply? I'm just
Yes.
kidding. Really?
Yes. Appreciate it very much.
After
Good
lunch,
stuff,
they're
thank
gonna
you.
talk about the product.
Biomic, yeah.
Biomic,
Yeah.
after lunch?
Yeah, we
Is
can
it
do it.
here?
If they allow me to do it here, I can. I can talk to Dave and say, you know, I really. did
So there
great.
isn't a lecture, you're trying to create a lecture, is that what you're saying?
I have a lecture series.
Okay.
I have a presentation. to bring.
Well, yeah, I wanna watch it, it's gonna be here.
I can do it here. I just have to ask them.
Okay.
Do you have information about your?
Yeah, yeah. I have
Thank
a
you very
group
much.
over there also, but
I didn't make it to the good.
I know, no
I can
worries.
call, I can call them. and
Yes,
get-
absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for yeah, no problems, guys. Have a good lunch.
So can I see you later?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, see you there then. Thank you.
Yes,
I heard there that you worked before for Digital Ventures.
yeah. Is that
correct?
correct?
You work for who? For Digital Ventures. So my friend, he wants to down the road get into the milling for dentures. Do you think Digital Ventures offered the milling machine for dentures?
Yeah, you can get, there's two ways of doing it. You can do printing of dentures or milling of dentures, right?
Right.
In my opinion, the milling of the dentures is much more accurate than printing. Yeah, so you can buy like the red pucks and mill your base. Okay, it's very easy to do. And then if you have the right software, you can actually use any type of teeth because you can choose from the software.
Sure.
Let's just say you want a blue line teeth or ivoclar teeth.
Is that from the library?
Yeah, you just choose the library and then it will do the sockets for you.
Right.
And then you just plug it in. That's it.
So let me ask you this, so a lot of the times I wanna like give, especially the surgeries,
Yes,
I wanna give them a temporary denture.
okay.
And, I seen a video from, I don't know if you know this, lab in Chicago by Luke Hong.
Look, yeah, I've seen that video, I think.
And he kind of recommends that if you're gonna do that, stay with the premium.
Printed dentures?
Yeah, premium, because if in the period of healing, they break it, I can just go back to the file and reprint another.
But you also have the file for the mill
Yeah, you can
dentures.
just remill it quickly.
Right, but it just because it's more, he goes, it's because it's
It's
more
efficient,
economical.
more efficient.
Yeah,
He's right about that.
yeah, that's what, I know, I see the millions, is that,
Here's the problem. I think with the red material that is printed, you don't really get good coloration. But with the pucks, you already have like veins and things in it, you know, so kind of like lucitone, you know?
Yeah.
And so you can get really good discs that you can mill beautiful
So it's
dentures
better
on.
looking, actually.
Better looking, more aesthetic. Printed, I think there's room for improvements, you know? I don't think
Not
printing
yet.
is great yet.
yeah.
It
'cause-
could be later. Here's the other problem with printing. The teeth themselves is only one color.
Yeah,
Whereas
Well,
if
he-
you decide to use that's pre-manufactured teeth, it already looks good, right?
mhm.
So there's some advantages to it, yeah.
there's different, yeah, because what he also doing is he's refining the
Yeah,
gum,
yeah.
and using the GC
Oh,
composites.
Yeah, yeah,
So he's kind of, you know,
yeah, in between there.
in between there and that, yeah.
So Kate, some people have asked for more information
Yes.
and actually a Another PowerPoint.